Good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome to TSK F1. My name's Rich, and this is hopefully going to be a new daily show, Monday to Friday. I'm going to do maybe 30 minutes in the morning talking about the latest news from around the F1 paddock and things that are coming out, basically, to try and digest everything into one place. It's a little thought I had, and I thought it might be a decent idea to do. So do get involved in the chat. It's meant to be interactive. If there's something you guys want to talk about, please do pop it in the chat as well. But first of all, make sure you're hitting that like button on the stream video if you're watching back at your pleasure, and also subscribing to the channel. The first thing I wanted to talk about today was the new wind tunnel for Red Bull. Obviously, Red Bull lost their boss, Mateschitz, just a couple of weeks ago at this point. Unfortunate news, he'd been ill for some time, but one of the last things that he approved as sort of the Red Bull group owner was a wind tunnel for the Red Bull team, because Red Bull are actually using a really old, repurposed RAF wind tunnel from back in the 60s. In fact, that's what Red Bull use. It's a really old one. Hello, Dan. How you doing? It's a really old one. Now, one of the problems Red Bull have is temperature control within their wind tunnel, because because of how it's housed and everything. They have repurposed it, obviously, for use in Formula One, but it isn't fit for purpose, really. And this was kind of alluded to when Christian Horner said about burning it down, but he didn't really. The problem was people weren't really aware of sort of the condition of Red Bull's wind tunnel. It's not a brand new thing. Now, they are getting a new wind tunnel, and I believe the plan is to have it done within around 2 years. So, love a bit of engineering chat. The plan's to have it done within about 2 years, this new wind tunnel for Red Bull, because the struggle with having the temperature controlled, which matters, I guess, for air density and things like that. And they also, it takes time to get up to speed where they get the most reliable results from the wind tunnel. So that it takes time, it takes energy, and things like that. So Red Bull are getting their new wind tunnel, and I guess the idea is to have it done by 2024. This came about and was planned before any cost cap things came into place, so it's irrelevant with that. How you doing, Sam? Good morning. The other side of this as well is that there's going to be, well, they're seriously talking about a wind tunnel ban in Formula One from 2030. So it's led some to question whether Red Bull should be doing it anyway. And this is because of how much energy they take to run and things like that, because they cost an absolute fortune to run. If a certain person may be supplying that wind tunnel, I'm not sure, mate. Not sure. You'll have to let us know. You'll have to let us know about that. So, yeah, they're talking about in F1 a ban on wind tunnels from 2030 anyway. And with Aston Martin building a brand new wind tunnel and Red Bull building a brand new wind tunnel, and I believe McLaren, I don't know if theirs is finished, but McLaren have been making theirs for a while. Much like Aston Martin, the McLaren stuff has been hit by the whole COVID period. It knocked all of their timeframes out. I don't know. Does anyone know if the McLaren one is completed? I actually don't know. But it's called. It basically, is it worth it? I think even if an F1 team can afford it and they get an advantage for one season, to them it would be worth it, wouldn't it? But it's interesting. It's also the one that Red Bull use is also the old Arrows wind tunnel, if you remember the team Arrows. So there's an interesting bit. Horner said, when you look at the way the world's going, simulation is playing a bigger and bigger role. We should have been brave enough to look at walking away from tunnels in the future. But unfortunately, there was a fear-based culture rather than embracing one. Now, that seems a little bit of politicking, to me from Horner. While I do agree that simulation is playing a bigger and bigger part, he's only saying about walking away from wind tunnels because he didn't want to build one. He didn't want the time, he didn't want the lead, he didn't want all of that. So of course, much like Honda leaving Formula One, Horner is going to be lobbying to have wind tunnels gone and to keep his powertrain as well. So I would imagine you would see Horner do a 180 on that opinion very, very soon when his new wind tunnel is one of the best in the business when it's brand new. I should imagine he'll want to keep wind tunnels for as long as possible. So that's a cool thing for Red Bull fans. New wind tunnel. They can't use it much, but there we go. It will be an additional revenue stream. Huge lack of wind tunnels in the UK. Indeed, indeed. Now, another piece of news, Red Bull related as well. All of this morning's news is Red Bull related, actually. Another piece of news this morning is Pirelli have said about how well Red Bull did on their tyres in Mexico, and that they must have had a huge upgrade basically during the season, because actually early in the season Red Bull were not good on their tyres and something has significantly changed. Someone from Pirelli said at the beginning of the season Red Bull weren't so good in using the tyres, and now we see that they have made a big step compared to the first part of the season. So they're probably focused on that. And that is an interesting thing, isn't it? That Red Bull as a team have clearly seen that tyre wear needs to be improved, and they have done. And I actually don't know how they'll do that. Maybe just pure balance of the car, the geometry of the suspension, things like that. I guess aero balance would help us just generally as well. What tyres are being loaded on what corners and things like that. That'd all help, wouldn't it? But for Pirelli to specifically point out, basically they were saying that they shouldn't have been able to go as long as they did on those medium tyres in Mexico. And that they must have done some significant upgrades in the mid-season part. And there was a picture, actually, earlier in the season, I don't know if anyone remembers, and it was Leclerc versus Verstappen. I can't even remember which race it was, but it was Leclerc versus Verstappen, and they were both on intermediates. What race was that? I can't remember what that race was, but they were the same age. And at the end of the race, you could see that that Leclerc's tyres had been eaten up with heat, and you could tell that they'd been scrubbing along the surface of the track when he's turned. They've scrubbed with like understeer and things like that. You could tell they were really chewed up. They were kind of like slicks, like we've seen previously from intermediate runners, but they were really chewed up as well. But right next to Leclerc, they're both finished on the podium. Right next to Leclerc was Max's Red Bull, and the tyres were the same age exactly. And Max Verstappen's looked like they'd just been produced by Pirelli. They looked brand new. Tons of tread. There was no graining, there was no blistering, there was no nothing. They were shiny, plenty of tread. They looked like they had been very gently treated indeed. So it's an interesting thing that for a while now they've been good on the tyres. We've seen this previously with Mercedes during sort of Lewis Hamilton dominance. We've seen them being very good on tyres, but they sometimes had a problem switching the tyres on and getting enough heat into them. And Red Bull seem to have hit this really nice sweet spot, if you like, of switching the tyres on and getting them in the window, but then not overheating them. And I should imagine that's one of the hardest things to do mechanically, aerodynamically within F1. I bet it's super difficult for them to do. Good morning, Jason. How you doing? So Pirelli specifically talking about Red Bull and how good they're treating their tyres. So that's, for Red Bull fans, I don't see that going away because nothing substantial is changing on the car going forward now until like 26. So if they've nailed that now, other teams will be playing catch up, and that's scary for other teams and fans of other teams because they've clearly got a fairly amazing platform. Have Red Bull because it's not only fast, it's very very kind on the tires, which is interesting. Another piece of news, which I suppose is it a piece of news? I'm not sure. It's sort of gossipy. I've realised I'm like 10 minutes in and I'm chatting away. What do you guys think to these things? But another piece of news is Lando Norris didn't just speak to Red Bull when mulling McLaren exit. Now, I don't think Lando Norris was particularly in danger of leaving McLaren when he signed his new contract. But he admitted that he spoke to Red Bull. But he's been keen to point out that he spoke to other teams as well. Now, this is a particularly interesting thing because where I do my gaming streaming over on Pit Lanes on Facebook, everyone thinks that Lando Norris is going to go to Mercedes. Everyone thinks Lando Norris is going to go to Mercedes. But there's a lot of noise being made about Lando Norris and Red Bull. And the more I think about it, his attitude, his demeanour, how he is, his youthful look, his gaming, he fits Red Bull, doesn't he? Do you guys think? I think he does. I think he really fits Red Bull for everything, really. For sure, if Max didn't exist, if you looked at the Formula One grid and said which team would you see Lando at, I think it'd have to be Red Bull. He has the arrogance. I don't mind Lando. I don't mind Lando at all, but I realise that he does rub some people up the wrong way. I'm on board with that. Cuppa. Who's got a cuppa for the morning chat? But it's a super interesting thing. And he points out that all drivers do what he did. They have a little chat with all the teams just to sort of keep in touch and things like that. But it's an interesting one because lots of people think Norris is going to go to Mercedes. Could you see Norris at Mercedes in 2025? This is the thing as well. Lando's contract goes to 2025. And especially with Lewis saying he's got more seasons in him, how long... Well, where would you see Lando going in 2025? Do you think he would stay with McLaren? It's an interesting thing, actually, that I've just twigged with what I was just talking about with Red Bull. The change in regulation comes in 2026, doesn't it? So he's got a contract to the end of 2025. So during 2025, Lando can be having conversations with other teams and seeing where they think they're at for the new regulations, which is intelligent, isn't it? It's an intelligent move. I'd not actually clicked on that until now. And maybe I should make a video on driver contracts and where they're at the moment, so that we could maybe see where drivers might move to. But that is a savvy move, actually. Yeah, I'd not actually clicked on that. So you could see him going there because Perez, you'd think Perez would have another couple of years in him, maybe at Red Bull. You'd think he'd maybe have another couple of years in him, wouldn't you? Who else are you putting in that Red Bull? And Perez is second in the championship. He's doing a perfect number 2 job. Who would you have take over Perez's spot? And with Hamilton saying he's going to have years on his contract, then no one's going to Mercedes, are they? Because they're not going to get rid of Russell because he's one of Lando, Charles, Russell. They're going to be up there, aren't they, with Max for years to come. So it's an interesting one. It is an interesting one. Please do make sure you smash the like on the video down below, guys. But we also have another one. We kind of spoke about this on the podcast last night. Where Kevin Magnussen, Mick Schumacher, Nico Hulkenberg in Haas. I'd love to know who people think should be in that Haas seat. It seems to me Hulkenberg is the only one that could be in there at the moment. Now, I think it could be. I can't remember who mentioned this, but down to the sponsors, because I think it was in Drive to Survive. I've not watched it in some time now, but it was in Drive to Survive where a German sponsor really wanted a German driver, and it just worked that Mick Schumacher had won the F2 championship, so they went in for him. Because really, that's ideal for Haas, isn't it? Mick Schumacher's going to be cheap, and they get a major sponsor. So it's going to work out for all parties. Now, for them to bring in Hulkenberg, I should imagine Hulkenberg has got some private sponsorship, but it doesn't make much sense unless it's sponsor driven. Now, Ralf Schumacher is absolutely positive that Haas could drop Kevin Magnussen, not Mick Schumacher, for next season. Now, Kevin Magnussen is actually signed on to next season. He is signed on to next season. He had a 2-year contract when he came back. And I can't say I blame him. When he came back, I think he sought certain assurances that he would remain on the grid for, you know, the foreseeable, so that he wasn't just coming back for a one-season wonder. He was leaving IndyCar. He was leaving a drive to come back to Formula One. So I can't say I blame him in getting a multi-year contract. And it would be a little bit rough on Kevin Magnussen if he got dropped to bring in Hulkenberg, because that doesn't make any sense to me either. I think Magnussen's better than Hulkenberg, but the logic escapes me a bit for Hulkenberg and Mick Schumacher. It's like they're just aiming for average. It's a bit of a strange one for me, and I think it must be sponsor driven. The sponsors must be on board to agree that he's a viable alternative to Schumacher, you know. But we'll see. Who do you guys think will end up at Haas? It's a difficult one. Also, Haas as their position need the sponsors, so I think their hands are tied with who they can put in the seat. But where would K-Mag go if that was to happen? Well, drop him. It's not my opinion. Ralf Schumacher is adamant, but we do have to remember his surname. Right? We do have to remember his surname. So, yeah, I agree, though, that the hands are tied, and they might be saying, well, if you want a German driver, there is a German driver available, and we feel that he's better than Mick. If the sponsors are on board, then there you go, right? And I don't know where K-Mag would go. Out of F1, he's been out of F1 before. I don't see that as an alternative, but maybe it is. Maybe it is. I'm really not sure. That's you know, drivers have got to lose the seats for drivers to gain seats, but it just seems a bit like pointless musical chairs to me to do that. Another thing towards the end of this that I just wanted to bring you was that Gunther Steiner has piped up about the Red Bull cost cap penalty and fine, and he says it doesn't really hurt them. He said it should have been much, much more, which I've not really seen anyone say such things. Now, Zach Brown of McLaren said that penalties need to be harsher in future, which I don't really understand the logic of that. They should be harsh, full stop, from the start. They shouldn't hand out a gentle sort of punishment with a view to making them harsher in the future, like slap of the wrist, no. For the record, I think it was about right, the punishment, but then I don't have all the data for what the wind tunnel usage will do. if you believe Horner, the lack of wind tunnel usage is worth about a quarter of a second to half a second. I don't believe it's worth that much at all. But, but, there you go. But Steiner has said the fine itself should have come out the cost cap. He is a believer it should have come out the cost cap. Even if it was less, even if it was a 5 million amount, Steiner has said that a £7 million fine doesn't do anything to Red Bull, which we're all aware of. And I offered my rationale for them not taking out of the cost cap yesterday when I said I feel like the FIA thought that Red Bull might make some people redundant, and that's bad press for the FIA. It's the only way I can see them not doing it, unless behind closed doors they'd all agreed not to touch the cost cap. But with Steiner saying this openly, you have to kind of think that it's on the table, right? It's on the table, the cost cap, because why would he mention it otherwise? If it wasn't on the table, he wouldn't mention it, would he? So it's just an interesting one there that I mean, he never really holds his tongue, does he, Gunther? That is one thing I like about him. I think managerial style can be a little bit crazy, but I do like the fact that he seems to speak his mind and he isn't too bothered about being politically correct or saying the right thing. So I understand the thing I don't like is also the thing I like, you know? But it's an interesting thing he's come out and said it so openly that it should have been a stronger punishment. It should have been a stronger punishment. What do you guys think on that? Because you know, it is a bit of an interesting one. Aston Martin have just come out and there are quotes saying that there should be fairness between the drivers on punishments as well, between drivers such as Pierre Gasly and Lance Stroll. I'm not sure what that is entirely about right now, honestly. I think it's to do with as well Danny Rick, his penalty. How is Danny Rick's 10 seconds? How is Pierre Gasly's 5 seconds? And how is Lance Stroll's 3 grid penalties? I think that what he's saying, none of it makes sense. Rather than particularly calling anything wrong, I think he's simply saying none of that makes sense because it's three different punishments, and it's the Aston Martin team principal Mike Crack there that said that there's no fairness between the drivers. So I think he does have a point there, and we've been talking about this, that it seems that you have one incident that gets this penalty, one incident that gets this penalty, this incident that gets that, but really they're all the same thing. Now, okay, George Russell, Carlos Sainz, that was a first corner incident, but I don't really subscribe to that. I don't really subscribe to the let things slide because one is on the first lap and things like you have to be. I think the word would be pragmatic about it. Like crowding someone off the track, okay, there's a lot going on a first lap. Punting someone in the side, like you know, there's a loud and there's a quiet pedal. Russell had the opportunity to use both, and he chose loudness. You know, he did have the choice. Whatever anyone says, he had the choice, and he chose violence. The boy, and just because it's the first lap, shouldn't then just give you free rein and a light penalty. I don't think there are certain things you can look and be sensible about, I think. And then there are other things, like he ended Carlos Sainz's race. And while it shouldn't be about the result, he did hit a car, he caused a collision, he caused that car to spin and lose all of its places. The end of the race, okay, but it just strikes me as a bit odd that we've got similar incidents and they've got completely different penalties, all three of them. When really, to look at them, they are quite similar. But it is an interesting one, I think. But what do we think? What do we think to this kind of thing? Now, what I would like to do, if anything, at that level, they should be more sensible in the first lap, and therefore penalties should be harsher. That's an interesting take. That is an interesting take. I'm just going to move the background because it's a bit off here. weirdly. Now, what do we think to doing this? What do we think to doing this? I had the idea to do sort of a daily thing last night and come online and do 30 minutes if possible. But if it's shorter, I won't force it to be a longer video sort of thing. But I'm really wanting to sort of try and grow something a little bit and make more content with TSKF1. Now, it's going to be interesting to see how it affects pit lanes over there, and I would like to get some bits going on in the background and changing images behind me and things like that, but it all takes time, so I'm going to have to work out my workflow to make this sort of show, if you like, as good as possible. Please make sure you've hit that like button. And the plan is probably next week, I will try it Monday to Friday and see how it interacts with me going live over on Facebook Gaming on Pit Lane Sim Racing and see how that works and see if the numbers stay the same and if things improve and if they don't and things like that. And hopefully there'll be enough news for me just to waffle on and chat for half an hour. And really, what really makes this a thing, just so you guys know, is chat. Offering me your opinions gives a lot more for me to work with, offer more opinion and chat with. So if there is enough to talk daily, I think there'll be enough to talk daily. Personally. But we'll see. So do make sure you're chatting. Do make sure you're getting involved. I'm going to be live over on Facebook Gaming in about 3 minutes with F1 Manager 22. And we've got the Austria and French Grand Prix this morning. So do come along over there, Pit Lane Sim Racing. But thanks a lot for joining me on the first one of these. And hopefully on Monday I'll have had some more ideas and it might get fleshed out a little bit more. Maybe. Thanks a lot, guys. See you later. Cheers.